is a cartoon which has been floating around the internet. Possibly you've seen it, or maybe not. It's a photograph of a meeting room with a group of attendees sitting around an oval conference table. Typical stuff on the tabletop you'd see at a meeting. Notepads and pens, coffee cups. Looks like there even might be some treats on the table. The attendees, 15 of them, are looking at the photographer with full attention. Most look very serious. A few have tongues hanging out. They appear to be in various ages. Some are blonde, some have brown hair, some appear to be of mixed coloring, and one even has a black head and a white body. Oh, did I forget to mention, this is a meeting of the canine variety? That's correct, this is a meeting of dogs. Seems it's a very important policy meeting, according to the caption anyway. And the caption? Well, the caption is, and I quote, "Today's meeting on feline health care." That's right, it's a meeting of dogs who are deciding policy on cat health care. Kind of reminds me of a law recently passed in Texas, which deals with the topic of abortion. The lesson we heard from Proverbs today is a challenging passage to hear. We might even get a stomach cramp thinking of how women have had to fight for hundreds of centuries for equal rights and a measure of self-worth that's not connected to their role as wife and mother. And thank you, Bill, for reading that. I know you said it was a difficult passage. These assumptions would have been expected and accepted when the book of Proverbs was written. We know that passages like this continued to be used to relegate women around the world to second-class status. I've never forgotten a time when, being introduced by one person to a new acquaintance, the presenter announced me as the mother of Kurt and the wife of Chuck, who was my husband at the time. She never once said my name to the other person. I was stunned and angry because I thought of myself as my own person before those roles. As a woman, I knew that I had more gifts than the assumed roles assigned to me. When we look further and read deeper in this passage, we see written in these verses much about a woman's independence, her strength, her skills, her abilities to execute life-giving choices for herself and for her family and the poor and the needy. This is not speaking of women as weak or helpless. This is speaking of a woman who is clothed in strength and dignity, recognized for speaking with wisdom and kindness. She's letting God know that she is making the best use of the gifts given her while holding society's assumptions and expectations lightly as she laughs at the time to come when God's vision will be the reality for all. So, back to abortion. This topic is complex, and each person must look into their heart, review their values and their conscience and experience to make their own decisions about the subject. I can only speak for myself and say my personal truth is, it's a decision which is extremely personal and should only be made by a woman involved with the advice of experienced medical people. Laws shouldn't work against personal choice in healthcare decisions. But most of all, what is troubling to me about the new law in Texas is that it is written in what I would characterize as vigilante law. with persons looking for offenders, maybe spying on other people, other people's perceived actions, and filing suit against individuals when they think another person has transgressed the time frame written into the law. Don't we have enough distension going on in our country right now without this attitude and type of action? Aren't we dealing with enough due to the pandemic, which is still rampant with millions of people suffering greatly from many real hardships, including economic adversities, such as the losses of their homes and security? Jesus is talking about vulnerability in today's gospel. He's talking about his willingness to suffer, his willingness to be vulnerable to the pure love of God and to the full experience of God's grace and mercy. We are as confused sometimes as the disciples were. We want to be recognized as great in human terms, when the real gift is to be recognized as one of God's own, on God's terms. Jesus is telling the disciples and us that God sees us fully in our own vulnerability when we acknowledge that about ourselves and each other. With that vision squarely in our hearts, we can experience God's presence more deeply in our lives and share that love, faith, and hope with each other. God, please, please have mercy on us today and always. Amen.
Amen.